I'd like to just go ahead and dive in and start with a couple stories. So this is a story. The first one is about an experience in high school, and the second one is about an experience in college. When I was growing up, things were not the easiest with my family. We were really pretty poor. There was tough circumstances at home, and things got a little better when I went to go live with my grandfather in middle school, and started kind of getting on the right track. And there was a moment though in high school, my junior year, early in my junior year, where I went to see a counselor. And it was just somebody who worked for the school. It was kind of part of the program in a way. It wasn't that I had reached out and asked for help, but in this conversation with this counselor, the person started asking me a lot of questions about my life growing up and my family. And as I just, was honest and talked about stuff that was difficult for me, this person kind of had a prognosis for me by the end of this conversation, and it didn't look very good. She said, she thought I was going to have relationship problems going forward, and self-confidence problems, and, just things were going to be a struggle, because she felt that, the kind of stuff that I'd been through really defined me and had shaped me, and that this is what my life was going to be like. For her, there was a definite kind of cause and effect. You go through this, and this is how you come out. And that was pretty depressing for me, to be honest. I'd been going along okay. I mean, I definitely still had stuff I was wrestling with. But that really just, it felt like the clouds that were on the horizon all kind of came in and got dark pretty fast. And I spent the next, a few months just feeling really dark. I'd go to school, I'd get through, but I'd get home and I would just like zone out. I would do anything I could to just kind of not be me, not live my life. And this darkness was there. It was persistent until one day I was just sitting on the couch, kind of zoned out. And this little thought came to me, and it wasn't like the deepest thought I've ever had, but it was enough. Like, it was like a little bit of ray of light coming through the clouds. And the little thought came as like a question. And the question was, you were actually pretty happy as a kid growing up, even when things were really difficult. If you could be happy then, in the midst of the most difficult stuff, how come you can't be happy now, even when it's over? And what that did for me was it made me ask questions. Like I said, it didn't give me answers, but it was a little bit of a wake-up call. Like, yeah, why do I have to feel this way right now? And I realized that the counselor, in their effort to help me, really, there was a lot of love there to try and be helpful, but it left me with this feeling of like a lack of choice, just your circumstances define you. And that question actually made me start thinking, no, actually, maybe I do have a choice. Maybe the way I think about myself makes a difference, because actually I hadn't felt as dark until I had that perspective given to me that felt defining, but, I could recognize that there'd been a mental shift in a real kind of negative way at that point. And that, I didn't necessarily have to let that weigh on me. A lot of times when we feel dark, we don't recognize that we have a choice. It doesn't feel like that at all. But in that moment, I started to feel like I might have a choice. And that choice might be rooted in a bigger sense of who I am, other than just those previous experiences and how I've been told they'll define me. And so I started really kind of going on a journey, a spiritual journey. And, it's not like I learned everything, but just the questions I started asking were a little bit deeper. I had, my family had actually studied Christian Science, and I'd learned about it. I'd gone to Sunday school sometimes. We weren't a very churchy family. We weren't super tied in or anything. But as I started reading a little bit more in the Bible and thinking about that, I got a better sense that actually good was very possible. In fact, that I kind of came out of it thinking, if I work hard, I can do very well, and that was positive. But then the next thing it led to was not necessarily a sense of myself rooted in like something deep and spiritual. I got the connection between my thinking and my life, and the fact that good was possible, which was great. But I then started to look to outward circumstances again for my good. Before, it had seemed like my outward circumstances had defined bad for my life. And now I was trying to look for a new set of outward circumstances that would define good for my life. And so I grabbed onto a very typical kind of model, like it was, if you get the best grades and you're part of a sports team and you join the right kind of clubs at school and you're in student government and you do some, community service activity and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then you can put together this great resume, get into a good college. That college is going to lead to good opportunities, a good job. You get to be somebody, you get to have a good income, and then your life will be good. I'm sure you've all heard that. And so I did my best at that, and I did pretty well, actually. I graduated with good grades, and I had this idea that I was going to get into some kind of a top school. In a moment of authenticity, I went and visited a small liberal arts school, and I actually ended up attending there. That moment of authenticity didn't necessarily last very long, because when I got to that school, I picked up where I'd left off, except even worse. My whole course of study, what I thought my major was going to be, and a lot of those extra activities, sports and whatever, were just, most of them were about, how is this looking to other people? How is this going to lead me to those models of success? And I didn't necessarily like them that much, some of them anyway. Even the ones I liked, it wasn't necessarily for the right reason that I was doing it. And so I didn't realize I was unhappy until the end of my first semester in college, when I got really sick. And I ended up in the on-campus care facility. And I was there for a couple of weeks. I was tested for tuberculosis during that time because I had similar symptoms. It came back negative. I did not have that, but nobody could figure out what I had. And it didn't look too good. I mean, I was pretty ill until I reached out to someone who was a Christian Science practitioner, and I asked this person to pray with me. We're going to talk about prayer and what all that means and how it works in just a minute. But this person, in the course of some of our conversations, said to me, you know what, if you get better, you don't have to go back. And that was another one of those light bulb moments, or like the light piercing through the clouds. It was in that moment that I realized I actually wasn't that happy doing things the way that I'd been doing it. And so, I called up my mom, and it was like, could I quit school? Could I just leave all of it behind? And my mom, bless her, was like, yes, you do whatever you need to do to get better and to find your next step in life. And so actually my health started to recover very fast. And within a few days I was better. I was packed up and I was out. I left school and I went home. I started searching again spiritually, and what I started to find took me even deeper. Not only was my life not defined by the bad stuff, but it wasn't going to be defined by anything the world said was like where my good comes from either. I started to get a bigger sense of what our identity is rooted in, what makes us who we are, what guarantees our path forward, what our purpose is. And I want to just start talking about that in just a second. But just to wrap up that story, I'll tell you, I realized school wasn't the problem. It was the way I was doing it. And so I actually went back to school, but I changed my major. I changed almost everything that I was doing. And I never had that health problem again. And, I did find a much more authentic way of like thinking about my decisions and how I was going to go forward. And that led to kind of some cool career stuff and other things. So story for another time. But let's pause now. Okay. Let's talk about these two stories, and let's talk about some big ideas and how they apply to some of the things we're thinking about today. And then in a little bit, I'll tell you another story. So first of all, prayer. Okay. I talked about how this woman was praying with me and I was praying in that last story. I didn't really use the word prayer, but I would say that's kind of what I was doing that day on the couch when I had this, inspirational idea come to me, and I started trying to think more about spiritual things and what they meant in my life. And so what is prayer, and what does it have to do with health, with well-being, with, finding good in life? Well, in the Bible, Jesus is asked, how do you pray? So here's a really good source. We can go to this resource because it's kind of there in black and white. Jesus is asked, how do you pray? And he says, first thing he says actually is go into your closet. And he's talking about, like, don't do this for other people. Don't do it for the way it looks to other people. He's talking kind of about like taking a step back from actually all the exterior outward stuff. I would say, like, kind of like take a step back from your fears, your preconceived notions, the opinions around you, your knee-jerk reaction to stuff. And then Jesus gives what many Christians today call the Lord's Prayer. I imagine a fair few of you today watching know the Lord's Prayer. It talks about the nature of God. It talks about our relationship with God and about what that means for us. So prayer is like taking a step back from the fear, the opinions, the reactions, and then getting focused on the nature of God and our relationship with God and what that means. Okay, so if that's what prayer is, then what is God, right? I mean, if it's about getting focused on the nature of God, what is God? God is an infinite subject. So, we could talk about that literally forever. But there's some really direct things that the Bible says about God. It says that God is actually our life itself. Life itself is God. The Bible says that God is truth. It says that God is love. And it says everything that was made by God, and nothing was made that God didn't make. And it says that God is purely good, as of purer eyes than to behold evil. So God made everything. Nothing was made that God didn't make. This God is pure good, is life itself, is love itself, is the cause or the very principle of everything. That is the reason for things, the law and the kind of science behind everything, that has a genuine, unavoidable effect in our lives. And the Bible says that the same fountain doesn't send forth fresh water and salty water at the same time. So God being only good can only produce good, right? The cause of life has to produce good, has to produce that which is like itself as a source, right? So God being this cause, this creator, is, many faith traditions would say, good would say, is ever present, always with us, literally everywhere, like the air we breathe. In fact, that's another word for God in the Bible, is spirit, which is translated as wind or air, like literally everywhere. You don't see it, but you see the effect of it. You feel the effect of it, and you know that it is tied to your very life and well-being. So much different than this like tribal God in the sky that likes this group and not that group, and loves some and hates others and that kind of stuff. But life itself and ever present, the source of all good. Well, okay, so prayer is taking a step back from fear and reactions and all that stuff and opinions, getting focused on this big God we're talking about and our relationship with God. So let's talk about that part. What is our relationship to a God that is life itself, that is truth and love itself? The first thing the Bible says about our relationship with God is that we're made in the very likeness of God. And that theme actually runs all throughout the Bible. There's not just like one passage like that. In the book of Psalms, it says, we'll be satisfied when we awake in God's likeness, or we awake to God's likeness. It says in Ephesians in the New Testament that we're going to put off the old man and put on the new man, which is like Christ. We'll talk about Christ in a minute, but after the nature of God. And even a little bit later in the New Testament, it says that whosoever is born of God doesn't sin. There is not an element of evil anywhere, of anything that is unlike the nature of God, that suffers, that causes suffering, built in fundamentally to who we are, to who we're made to be, to whatever defines us, to whatever defines our lives and our purpose and our well-being, or anybody else for that matter. So this theme runs throughout, and I want to read you one line that I really love. It's right in the middle of the Bible. It's written by the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, and he's writing like in the voice of God, and he says, "Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the end of the earth, everyone who's called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." So sons from far away, daughters from the ends of the earth. That's everybody, right? Everyone's included in that. Formed and made by God. Well, if we're talking about the God, that is love itself and life itself, that's a good thing. But who heard the reason why? What's the purpose word? Did you hear it? It says, for my glory. We're made for the glory of God. Well, the glory of something is the brightness or the brilliance of something. To glorify something means to make something known. Now, we can make God known. We could say our purpose is to glorify God. Our purpose is to make God known by like shouting about God and talking about God and posting on social media about God. But it's not talking about what we do or what we say. It's talking about who we are. It's talking about our very being, our very nature. Our nature, the reason we exist, is as the glory of God, to make God known. Well, this kind of makes sense if you think about the fact that we are made in the likeness of God. You don't see wind or the air, but you see the effect of it, right? Like when the wind blows the leaves in the trees. In the same sense, you can't see love, you can't see truth, but you can see the effect of it, right? You can see kindness, you can see integrity, you can see beauty, you can see creativity expressed, right? Made manifest. And that's us. That's what we're made to do. That's who we're made to be. It doesn't matter if we go to college, don't go to college, if we, live in one place or another, had a good family, bad family, rich, poor, whatever, all this stuff that seems so defining. What the Bible says is this is built in, right? This is organic to our very nature. And that all these other areas of life, our families, our school, our friends, and the things we do, the sports we play or whatever, or don't play, that's where it shines through, right? That's where it takes shape, not in cookie cutter kind of ways, but actually because it's an infinite source in completely unique and individual ways, but in ways that always only include those characteristics of this kind of a God that we're talking about, that this is actually how life is meant to work. This is who we're meant to be. It's who we're made to be. This is the only law of life that is unstoppable, unchangeable, fundamental. Everything else is a kind of a theory. Everything else is a fear, is a distorted version of who we are, is an ignorance to what's true. A little bit like kind of applying this back to my story. I totally have felt the effects of my sense of my life as defined by these other things. That was not a dream. It wasn't fake. I mean, I felt it. But at the same time, it was rooted in something that wasn't fundamental to who I was. There was a beneath of it, ultimately a kind of misperception of things. And as long as, that seemed to define my sense of my life, it was very tangible. But when some truth broke through, when the light shone, I saw something that was deeper, that was actually untouched by that. And the more I saw that, the more I experienced it, the more there was a tangible effect in my life that way. And all that brings us to the word discovery. And I'll talk a little bit about those stories again in a second, but this is our theme, discovery. And the word discovery implies that something is already there. You can't discover it if it doesn't already exist, right? I mean, anything else is just a philosophy or a theory. The laws of aerodynamics were discovered. They were already there. And there was a lot of people working that out. You know about the Wright brothers. You may or may not know about a Brazilian guy named Santos Dumont, who's living in France, who was also discovering the laws of aerodynamics around the same time. And there was one or two others. They were the same laws, right? And none of these people were just it wasn't just their theory. None of them were just thinking positively about it. A lot of times spirituality gets put into this realm of just positive thinking, hey, good to have a good attitude, good to have these spiritual thoughts that can make you feel happy. But then the tough stuff of life seems more fundamental, seems more unchangeable, right? More defining. But I think spirituality is just so much more than that. I think spiritual discovery is discovering what is already there, that is just the deepest, most organic stuff to life. And to me, something like the discovery of the laws of aerodynamics is an analogy. It's a way of saying, none of these people went up to a tall hill and just thought positively about flying. That wasn't going to get you anywhere, I mean, that wasn't enough. Their journey was mental, right? It was happening in their thinking first, right? They didn't first see evidence of people flying. So there was no outward evidence that this was possible, but the fact of it was rooted in a principle that was always true, that was absolutely universal. So the journey was mental. They had to first understand this principle, and the more they understood it, though, it wasn't a happy thought. It was something they could build on. It was something they could prove the next day. And not all at once, but little by little by little, they proved it more and more. And people who have understood that principle after them have proved even more and even more. So it just continues. And I would say that's actually what we see going on in the Bible. We see people in the middle of a famine finding food. We see people who are strangers in a place that's foreign to them, who feel lost and alone, finding community and love. We see people in the middle of war finding safety. We see people who are living under the regime of a terrible king finding justice and safety, a way to be themselves. We see people who are labeled as incurable finding health and wholeness. All these folks in the Bible, men, women, rich, poor, even different ideas about God, they are discovering something in each of these stories about the nature of God. Their thought turns to the nature of God, and whatever it is that inspires them has then a tangible effect. To me, that's a discovery, right? It's not just a positive thought. And so the moral of the whole thing is everybody can do that. The truth is the truth and has always been the truth. It is the truth for all people. And we get tangible results, even if it flies in the face of how things seem to be. But remember what Jesus said, it's about taking a step back sometimes first from the way things seem to be. That doesn't mean stick your head in the sand. That doesn't mean like just, hear no evil, see no evil, pretend it's not there. It means like just go deeper than that. What's actually here right now? Like, it doesn't look like people can fly, but there is a principle that says we can build something that proves we can. So, just as like there was a principle in the middle of those circumstances in the Bible that proved actually we can eat, actually we can be safe, actually we can be whole, actually we can be loved. And so for every one of us, it is what defines us, coming back to, what is God and what is our relationship with God, that we can build on that there's a tangible effect that comes from that, even though the journey is mental, even though that mental journey is flying in the face of the way things seem to be, because it's rooted in an actual principle, right? Not just a good thought that changes to a bad thought, back to good thought, but an actual discovery of a principle. It can have an effect. So, looking at my life, I was discovering a little bit more than what my life had seemed to be, what the counselor had said it was going to be. And it emotionally, and in the case of the college situation, physically healed me. I had a pretty bad illness, and then suddenly I started feeling well. Why? Because there was a mental shift. Not just a positive thought, but something became clearer to me about who I was and what my life was like. And it was just a little glimmer, but it got bigger and bigger. And it led to very practical next steps, which showed me how to go forward, showed me how to be freer and how to get around the stuff that seemed like the roadblocks of life, to find my path, to find what was actually normal, actually natural and authentic to anybody. Spiritual discovery, I think, is about finding our rock. It's about finding a foundation. And right now, there's a lot of things that would seem to define us, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's, we didn't get to graduate the way we wanted to, whether it's, it seems like slim job opportunities, we're feeling isolated at home. There can be a pretty long list of that stuff. And there always is, frankly, whether you take it out of this time and just say, what's your family like? What's your economic situation like? What about race, gender, age? These are all the things, there's always something, isn't there? There's some story, and it doesn't mean we can ignore it. We got to deal with it. But how do we deal with it? What is our foundation? What is our rock that helps us feel like we're not just pushed around? When the winds blow and the waves beat, like, are we just like stuck with that? Do we just get, blown wherever the circumstances may? Some people get a good hand, some people get a bad hand. The message of the Bible is no, it's not. Our lives are not a good and evil story. Uh, it is a story of pure God-like power, and that we can discover that, and that can ground us and open our eyes to the path that is there. There's always a path. There's always a stepping stone that we can step onto right here and now, which is the stone that leads to the next one. And this brings in an idea I want to talk about, which is Christ. Christ, you probably know, is not just the last name of Jesus. If he'd had a driver's license, it wouldn't have said Jesus Christ, like last name. It was a title. It meant, it's the Greek word that also means Messiah in Hebrew, and it just means anointed one. It symbolized that glory of God, which shone through his life, that presence and power of God that we saw exemplified, or we read about being exemplified in his life in a way that is unique in human history, and yet is indicative of everybody's life. Jesus showed us something unique about grace, which in a short phrase we could say is the unearned love of God. That is all of this good we're talking about freely given. You know, we don't earn it. We don't have to work our way up to it. Our circumstances don't define it. It's established. It is just freely flowing at all times. That's grace, you know, and it's not we use our spirituality to get it or to deserve it. Or once we've read enough books or done enough things, then it'll be there waiting for us. God on the other side of the river, and we just have to figure out how to cross the river and get there. No, it's like God coming straight to us, always present, right? But that true idea of what God is dawning for us, you know, those little glimmers of light that break through the clouds. That is the nature of Christ. That same brilliance of God, which shone through the life of Jesus, is ever present. You know, that presence and activity of God is always going on. Jesus' life, you know, gave us a window into what that is. It's humility. It's qualities like Jesus talked about, meekness and hungering and thirsting after righteousness, that help us, you know, like feel more open to that and come into contact with that, even though it's always sort of broadcasting, if you will. But it is this true idea of God which inspires us and shows us the way forward. This is, at any given moment, we can feel that. That's our rock. And here's the thing: if there's like a big stream that you have to cross, you know, and you know there's a path with these kind of stepping stones that we talked about before, the whole thing could be totally fogged in. You could say, I cannot see in front of me. I have no idea where this is going to go or what it's going to feel like 10 steps down the road. I can't even imagine what I need to do, you know, in 5 days, let alone in 5 months. The thing is, though, if you know that you're on the right step right now, then you also know that that's the step that leads to the next right step. The only step that leads to the next one is the right one right now, right? Does that make sense? And that is what that true idea of what God is helps us see. It helps us see us and life and the information that's coming to us, the stuff we're seeing and processing and having to deal with, the decisions we have to make in the right light right now, just right in this moment, knowing exactly what we need to know, feeling the peace and the clarity that we need, and giving us the strength to stand on that rock right now with the knowledge that there's a principle behind this. Like, if there's a path and we know that path leads to what's good, then even if we can't see the path, as long as we know we're on the step, right, of that path, then when the moment comes to take that next step, we'll see it. We'll see exactly what we need to know. It's not a blind faith kind of a thing. It's not like, I hope this works out, or I'll just blindly close my eyes and know that it's all going to work out. That's not the point. There's an actual, you know, kind of scientific sense of, like, obviously the only step that leads to the next right step is the right step right now. That's like, you know, on a staircase, which step leads to the next stair? The one before it, you know? So how do you know you're going to get to the next stair? How do you know you're going to get to the top of the stairs if you can't see anything but the one stair you're on? As long as you know that you're on the stair of that staircase, that's the stair that's going to lead to the next stair. we can always feel that. We can always feel that, the strength of that beneath our feet, comforting us, clarifying for us whatever we need to know. That's what helps us answer these questions like, how am I going to have the patience to get through this? Is it going to end? How do I know how things are going to work out? Well, you don't have to have the patience for tomorrow. You don't have to have the patience for 5 months down the road. You just have to have the peace to feel like I am exactly where I need to be right in this instance. I am talking to the people I need to talk to. I am loving the way I need to love. I am being inspired the way I need to be. I'm doing what I need to do today in this moment. And even if you can't see till the end of the day, you just, for this hour, and then in the next hour, you do the same thing. God, what do I need to know right now? What is my step right at this moment? How do I love at this moment? How do I connect at this moment? If we're getting that, then that is our kind of guarantee. That brings us peace. It brings us patience because it helps us know every moment we're going to have what we need. Every moment is going to be full and fulfilled and purposeful. We're not waiting for our purpose to kick in. We're not waiting for, the good to show up. We can feel the fullness of all the good we need at any given moment, which leads to the good of the next moment. And a lot of people are talking about mental health issues right now, about anxiety and hopelessness. And I get that. I have felt that. I've talked to a lot of people who have felt that. But we don't have to feel the clouds of that, holding us in or defining our lives, if we know that even in the face of that, there is something we can discover right now that shows me what I've been talking about, exactly what we need to know, do, feel, see, understand. And that leads to action. It's not just happening in our head. Again, we build on that, right? Something is expressed through that. That part's actually the easy part. Just getting that true idea of God is what just clears the landscape. And then we have ideas of what to do. Sometimes they're bold and really, unexpected ideas. And sometimes they're just very quiet, simple ideas. But either way, if it's the right thing at that moment, it fulfills us. It feels right. There is no loss of opportunity when that's the way we're living, because our opportunities are not coming from out there. They come as the outgrowth of the discovery of what God is right here with us. When I graduated from college, I had a degree in philosophy, and it led me to a finance career, and it led me to a prison ministry chaplaincy, which I did 2 or 3 times a week. It led to all these cool things, but it wasn't the degree that did it. It was always a new opportunity, a new door, meeting a new person, one thing leading to the next. And there's nothing blind in that. If we're taking each step by step on this path, what Jesus might call the straight and narrow way, we know where it leads. We know it leads to good. We might always know the form it's going to take, but we know that even if the form we might have expected isn't there, it will take some form. Like a river flows. You can throw a big boulder in front of it, but the water's going to keep going. And it'll go around the rock, it'll go over the rock somehow, but you can't, it's just going to go. And the good of our life is going to go. There is no loss of that opportunity, of that flow, because that flow is from an unstoppable source. Our God is not, stopped by anything at any point that anybody does, whether it's a global thing or a very personal thing. So we're never alone. It's that same God which connects us to others who need love, who need help. Whatever seems to be on the line, whatever seems to be stripped away, we can find it in this way. I want to mention 2 more things, and we'll open it for question and answer. Mary Baker Eddy, who I mentioned, I think up front, is the founder of this approach to Christianity. Felt she made a discovery in her life, and she called it the science of Christ, or Christian Science. And that is a way of saying that, we can look at the life, the teachings, the love, the example, the healing of Christ Jesus, and see that there is a timeless truth there, something that applies to everybody equally. Again, in the light of God's grace, we don't earn it or work our way up to it. It is a fact of reality. We can discover it. It can be understood. Spirituality is not a mystery. It's not a puzzle up on a mountaintop for people who are really smart or really dedicated. It is for everybody. It is our God-given, through the grace, through the love of God, resource, open door for us to feel what God is always giving us, no matter what. When we read the Bible, or, like Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which I'll talk about in just a second, we don't have to read it saying, how do I do something with this? It's what is it saying to me? How is it educating me? How is it guiding me? How is it enlightening my view? How does it help me help the world? That's that grace of God. And there's a science behind that. That's what she felt she discovered. She overcame many of the restrictions of her time. When women couldn't vote, she was, preaching when she wasn't supposed to preach. She was writing books on spirituality when that wasn't something women were supposed to do or thought proper to do. She wasn't out there to change the laws necessarily, but she knew they would change. She knew it was inevitable. When you seek the true idea of God and who we are, whatever is unjust, whatever holds you back, whatever restricts you, whether it feels personal or it feels societal, it cannot stand. She lived out from the standpoint of this true idea of God. She said, there is a science behind this for everybody. It helped her find healing in her life from physical illness, as well as in these kind of restrictions of her time. She just was rooted in something bigger, rooted in the very nature of God, and showed that anybody can do that. I mentioned her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. She wrote this book for absolutely everybody. And just as much as she found healing, she turned around and taught other people how to heal. And then they turned around and taught other people to heal. And from the beginning, this has been a very organic kind of grassroots healing movement. There is no hierarchy. It is just people who have, read this book or discovered something about Christian Science and found healing. The last 100 pages of this book are all stories of people who, were many times diagnosed as incurable and found wholeness, found health, found transformation in their lives. And this is something that, Mary Baker Eddy felt Jesus had promised. In the Bible, he said, whoever follows me will do the works that I do. This is not a new philosophy. This is a discovery of what that means, the implications of that in our lives. So why healing? Why is that so important? Because it gets it out of philosophy mode and it gets it into just what is real. You can't separate discovering a true idea and the tangible effect that has in your life. And that tangible effect is healing. That's the coming to light of what is normal, not a miracle, but what is actually kind of fundamentally always meant to be. It leaves us in a position where we cannot be apathetic about life or about the struggles of other people. There's a lot of people going through tough stuff. It also means we won't be overwhelmed by what we have to deal with, because there is a science to how we work through this. Apathy often comes from feeling overwhelmed. These two things kind of will go together sometimes. We look at so much to do and we're bombarded with so much information, that seems tough. And sometimes we just kind of shut down. And yet to know there's a way, to know that way is accessible to anybody, to know that you don't have to have some position of power in order to understand the power of the principle of the universe, and how our prayer is like kind of opening the blinds of a window and lets the light in. We might not feel like we're a big somebody, but the light itself has power, and we don't have to, we can't just sit around and think, this doesn't matter. This compels the same love that we feel loving us is the same love we turn around as we feel that we realize, actually, this loves everybody the same way, even the people I don't like, even the people that seem like they don't deserve it. And it kind of inspires us to move, but then keeps us from feeling overwhelmed when we do move, because we realize that the power is in the principle itself. It's in the truth itself. It's in the love itself. And all we're doing is following it. All we're doing is letting it shine through our lives. I'm going to read you this quote real quick. Mary Baker Eddy wrote, first of all, she starts the book saying the time for thinkers has come, which I love, because to me that just says, okay, people, let's really think about this. She says, the conceptions of mortal, erring thought must give way to the ideal of all that's perfect and eternal. Through many generations, human beliefs will be attaining diviner conceptions, and the immortal and perfect model of God's creation will finally be seen as the only true conception of being. She starts the next sentence with the word science. She's talking about the science of Christ. She says, science reveals the possibility of achieving all good and sets mortals at work to discover what God has already done. So it's there, it's already for us. And we're discovering, that we can prove that. I'm going to read you one line here too from the Bible. This is from St. Paul in Corinthians. He says, now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Again, the idea is God knows this. It is already complete. God is showing it to it. Do we kind of see it, but through a dim lens? It's not that we're totally blind, we see good, we see beauty. If we look for it, there's a lot of good going on, but it seems mixed in, right? It seems like we see it in this distorted way. But what we're doing is we're waking up to what is normal and natural, this more complete, clear idea of how creation is made to be. And I told you I'd tell you one last story. This is going to be very short, I promise. I've gone just a tiny bit longer than I meant to go before our Q&A. This is a short one. I was actually asked to come to an event. It was a leadership event. It was put on by the same organization that's sponsoring this today, this Discovery Bound group. They had brought in a couple of these guys. You may have heard of them, called the Lost Boys of Sudan. If you don't know about them, the short version is one group persecuted another group in the country of Sudan and were terribly violent, to the people and especially the boys in the villages throughout this whole region. And those boys had to flee and they were never able to go home. So other countries took them in as refugees and a certain contingent of them came to the United States. These boys had grown up a little bit. They were about 19 years old, 20 years old, I think, when we saw them. And they came to this leadership conference held by Discovery Bound. And they were the keynote speakers, two of them. And they talked for about an hour and a half about a lot of the really difficult, pretty gruesome things that they went through and that their friends and families went through. Now, I was at that event as the Christian Science practitioner, available to be on call, anyone who wanted to talk and pray. And I was asked to give a 10-minute inspirational talk right after this hour or hour and a half, very real kind of tough presentation. How would you like that job? 10-minute inspirational talk, go, after you just heard this tough stuff. Well, I talked in short form about a lot of what we've said today. I talked about it through the lens of compassion. That's a word that shows up in the Bible a lot right before Jesus heals people. It says he has compassion on them. It's a way of loving so deeply that it doesn't matter if somebody looks like our enemy, looks like the other person out there that, is trapped and suffering. When we look at the inequalities of the world, the divisions of the world, the challenges the world faces, climate change and things, we can get into any of that in the Q&A if you want. But in essence, like these boys who had been through very difficult things, this compassion, this love is so big that it is able to take a step back from the fearful scenarios, the inequalities and injustices, and say, I will be challenged to see more. I will be challenged to see past my own limited views, my own, misperceptions of other people, my own false education, my own fears or the opinions around me, and I will be challenged to discover more of this big, complete idea of what God has done and what God is doing, so that I can have informed views, actionable ideas, creative out-of-the-box solutions, and help, right? Make a difference in the world. Well, when I got to the end of this talk, what was interesting was these guys came up to me and one of them said, we've been giving presentations for years since we got here. And we've heard a lot of people who want to do good things and help our villages back home, but we've never heard anything like that. And the one guy said to me, that's what we need. This is the only thing I've heard in years that actually is what's going to do it. And to me, that was reaffirming, because we can again be tempted to think spirituality is just our little religion, our little self-help system, our little thing that we do to feel better. But then what about how we actually make difference in the world? What's this practical thing that we're going to do? And these guys who had been through really the toughest stuff were saying, that's it. That is literally the only thing. We need something so out of the box that's rooted in something so much more fundamental and reliable, that's what's going to help our families. And so it was just a reminder to me, yes, this comforts us and helps and heals us, but you can't say it's a science and say it's only for you, right? I mean, everybody is included in this. There is no peace unless everybody gets peace, right? Equally. Until that happens, there is more to do. And the good news is that's not a burden on our shoulders. It is the grace of God which empowers us, guides us, and leads us step by step to make that change for the better. So I'm going to pause now, and I know I did go a few minutes longer than I meant to before the Q&A, but I hope you'll take a moment. Feel free to ask a question if you like. Again, if you'd put a little T in front of your question, just so that I know it's from a teen, I'm going to scroll through any questions that are here. Sometimes it takes a moment to, you've been taking in a lot of information to process that and kind of ask something. And if you don't have a question, that's just fine. I also want to say to you, we've been here coming up on an hour now, and you're not in a public auditorium. No one's going to see you. If you need to log out at any point, that's fine. There'll be a video replay of this lecture on the Discovery Bound website. You can go there and find that pretty soon. I think within probably at least a couple days of this. So if it turns out there's a bunch of questions, feel free to log out at any point. If there's not a lot of questions, that's totally fine too. We've, like I said, covered a lot of ground, and we'll sign out here in a second. But let me just look at the list here of the Q&A and see. I feel like I see a few questions here. A friend told me that she's concerned about my being a Christian Scientist and the vaccine. She said when a vaccine comes out, if I don't take it, she would feel like she couldn't see me. I told her I would do whatever the law requires, and she said that to her, it's more than following the law, that she wouldn't want to be near someone who isn't taking the vaccine. What are some kind ways to reassure my friend? That's a really good question. It's worth touching on here because I think if you say to people, good is normal, good is natural, that prayer is what leads us to a sense of sustained good that comes directly from God. It's not unusual for the question to come up, well, does that mean you're just not going to care if there's a problem? Hopefully you have a sense already that this doesn't lead to not caring about problems, but it also doesn't lead to something that is irresponsible. It doesn't lead to something that doesn't care about what other people do or think. If you look at the life of Jesus, the golden rule is actually the outgrowth of his theology, right? It's not in conflict with it. It's not like, well, here's what I believe is true about God, or I can choose that or loving my neighbor. Doing what it works in concert with society, with local authorities, with what is required, in our communities, whether that's something as simple as wearing a mask or whatever. That loving our neighbor, whatever is most loving, is going to be the outgrowth of this idea, not in conflict with it. Again, as I started, it's not that the stuff kind of out there can hurt us any more than it helps us. The stuff outside of the one source of good that is just ever present, we don't have to fear it any more than we have to hope and rely on it as our savior or our salvation, because that's wishy-washy in both directions. Just like it was in my life, I kind of showed you the what seemed like the negative definition, as well as the I hope this works out kind of good definition. There is a confidence in knowing where our good comes from, and yet that does, as this person was kind of saying, if the law requires it, I will do that. What will reassure your friend? Perhaps, I don't know your friends, so I'm not trying to say the answer, but I think helping people see my best sense of what's true and good leads me to love people. It leads me to love the local authorities. It leads me to just really, be interested and willing in doing whatever is going to help people, keep people safe. I'm not in conflict with that. My life is not. My beliefs are not. My approach to health and wholeness is not. And really help people understand that the way that the golden rule is the outgrowth of that. It's quite normal and natural. Hopefully that was helpful. Somebody has asked another question. At various points in our lives, many of us have felt disconnected from who we really are, or think we are, and is asking, would you please talk a little bit more about finding authenticity in your search? I think authenticity, what I kind of love about where we're at in society today is like, it's much cooler than it used to be to be yourself. It doesn't mean we're always able to do it. I mean, plenty of people, obviously, we feel very pushed at times to look like we're being ourselves, which is like the most inauthentic, like, pretend to be authentic, But, and so you can look at people's Facebook feeds or whatever, Instagram, and like, see a kind of image that's being put forth. But when we're not just trying to find our good out there, trying to fulfill those models, like I was talking about, it was not authentic for me to say, I'm ticking all these boxes, I'm doing all these right activities. Look how cool I am. Look how good I am. Look how worthy I am. Look how valuable I am. That's what I was trying to do. And it didn't work out. It actually made me physically ill. And it didn't really get me anywhere. Sometimes it's worse when it seems to get you somewhere, but there's always going to be a point where that ends because it's not stable. That approach to life will always feel pushed around by the winds and the waves when they hit. There's no rock beneath your feet there. We are always scrambling to worry about what the next person thinks, and to the next day to try and keep up the image. What is authentic is finding a good that is so stable, that feels so constant, that feels so freely given, that it fills us up, that it makes us feel safe, that it makes us feel like it is okay to let this light that I'm finding shine through my life in whatever way feels most true, and this is not about sort of like my truth and your truth. I mean, truth isn't relative. There's just one truth. There are many ways to understand it, and there are many ways to express it. But I feel like people at the end of the day respect and acknowledge and deeply feel, even if they don't know why, what is genuinely good. I mean, I remember a friend of mine in high school coming up to me. Actually, he was a friend of mine from high school coming up to me in college. My very first friend who ever got married, like way before any of us. We were at his wedding, and I was one of the first people out on the dance floor. And this other friend from high school comes up to me and he's like, I want to tell you something. I never told you this for years, but I watched you all throughout high school, and I noticed how you seem to have a confidence. You seem to be able to just love people and be happy. And you would always be one of the first people out on the dance floor because you didn't seem worried about what other people think. He said, I always have felt like I needed to drink a lot in order to find my confidence before I could let go and get out on the dance floor. Well, I mean, that's just a kind of a small example, but same kind of thing plays out so many times in our lives. The more we feel filled up, the more we're able to give and love, and that shines through in our lives in so many ways. That's where our authenticity comes from. It's not choosing what we want to be or trying to be what other people think we want us to be. And I know we've all heard that lots of different ways, but it's not always easy as long as we feel like our good comes from other people's opinions of us, then it's hard not to care about what they think, right? But it's not that we don't care about loving or doing good or good happening. It just means we're not expecting our good to come from those outward things which change constantly with the wind and with opinions. We're getting past opinions. We're getting past outward things as being our source from good. To me, that's what empowers us to be authentic and to express, the good of life in that kind of consistent and authentic way. Hopefully that's helpful. Somebody has asked this question, and I want to say this too, actually. Some of you may have very heartfelt, very genuine questions, which are about, some personal problem that you're going through. And I want to say that, I'm happy to share ideas, but, there's more resources for you. So after this, if you go to christianscience.com, you go to the Find Us tab, you can look up a Christian Science practitioner in your area. You can find church resources online. Probably a lot of them are online right now, but as things open up, local brick and mortar stuff. You can find Sunday school classes if you're still in the Sunday school kind of age range. You can go to the shop tab on christianscience.com and find, a way to buy Science and Health, buy the Bible. There's other talks like this one. If you go to the Praying About World Issues, it's like if you scroll down on the homepage, you'll see lots of cool articles. You'll see some videos, some presentations like this. So there's a lot that's there for you. So I can share some ideas, kind of applying what we talked about here today to whatever. But if you are in search of individual healing for something, feel free to reach out and know that there's this kind of global community that's available to anybody at any time. And this person, I'm not going to mention the specific thing, but they're saying, I have problems with my knees, and I went to a doctor who suggested a certain method, and is just wondering, what do I do? How do I handle that? Going forward. Now, this is, as I was just saying, I don't know you, and even if I did, I don't give anybody advice, right, or tell anyone what to do. That's something that's beautiful about the practice of Christian Science, is it's not about just another opinion, right? It's actually considered kind of unethical from the standpoint of a Christian Science practitioner to tell someone what to do. All that this is about is helping people think for themselves, right? So we are often inundated with fears. We're inundated with, the worry about, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. We've got lots of opinions around us. And so as we pray, our prayer is, and I'm talking to everybody, but I'm also talking to the person who just asked this question. Your prayer can lead you to take a step back from the stuff that's swirling around in your thoughts. Sometimes I find it helpful to just try and identify what that is. Like if I was to go back in time and talk to the me sitting on the couch that day early in high school, if I could ask that person, what is it that seems to be weighing on you right now? I probably could have listed some things that were making me really sad and making me really worried, both about the present and the past and the future. To take that, I was actually just talking to another friend about this recently too. Put it out there, be real about that, right? We don't have to pretend that that's not there. It actually helps to expose it and identify it. Sometimes it helps to even write it down. But then, as you go and you look at what the Bible says about the nature of God, as you read a book like Science and Health that is written for the purpose of explaining how those ideas in the Bible apply to our lives, read it from this standpoint of, I want to discover this God that, as I learn about the nature of God, I know I'm going to find myself. I'm going to find a truer sense of who I am. I'm going to find a truer sense of the power in my life, of what actually governs and determines the good in my life. And as any of us find that is what thinking for ourselves is about. It's from that, because that's truth. So finding truth, when we're reasoning out from truth, it gives us ideas of what to do. Every one of us has our own walk in life, right? Whatever step comes to you to take is going to be between you and God. But when you're finding the idea of what to do, rooted in what the nature of God is, in a way that feels more fearless, more clear about, what life is and that kind of stuff, that is always what's going to lead to the most informed, the most practical next step, and then the next step. That goes with any, physical problem, is just as much as it does with a relationship issue or, big global issues that we're dealing with. Why? Because what God is definitive of everything, right? The principle of life is the principle of all. Just like you'd say, 7 and 3 equals 10 for all things, right? You take 7 chairs and 7, and 3 chairs, and they're going to add up to 10. You do 7 people and 3 people, they add up to 10 people. A principle applies to everything equally. The principle of goodness, the principle of life, the principle of wholeness and health is what we find when we go looking for the nature of God. And it's not that we have to know it all, but you will find that whatever you're learning, whatever's jumping off the pages to you, whatever ideas are resonating with you about what God's nature is, do begin to put your life, your decisions, your next steps into an enlightened kind of perspective that will help you know what to do next. So I hope that helps. And again, you can find, resources. There are people you could call a Christian Science practitioner to pray with you, to treat you specifically, through the method of Christian Science, if that's something that feels right to you. There are ways to, feel supported by the prayers and the help of other people. Let's see if any other questions have come in. Somebody asked me to tell the age for Sunday school. In Christian Science churches, the age range is from like 0 on up to 20 years of age. So if you're up to 20, you can have access to the Sunday school resources that are online in many of the different local Christian Science churches around the world. Someone says, how can you tell if the ideas come from God or just from the noise? That's a really good question. One thing that's helped me, do you know what a litmus test is? If you're like in a science lab, it's like, for example, in chemistry, you have like a little sheet of paper that has certain properties. I'm simplifying this. And if you like expose it to a certain chemical or liquid, it turns a certain color or has a certain reaction to it. And it's kind of like, you always know if your little piece of paper turns red, that it has been exposed to a certain kind of property, right? For example. And so we all have this internal built-in litmus test when it comes to, the ideas that come to us. It doesn't have to feel like a mystery. And I've been talking a lot about getting to know more about the nature of God. And this is really what hones and informs our internal litmus test, because the more we know about the nature of what's fundamentally real, right, and unavoidable and consistent in life, that which comes from the nature of God, which really is the nature of God, the more our litmus test is clear. And what I mean is that when a thought comes to us, sometimes something can feel in the moment like passionate or like it's really important to us, or like, oh my gosh, this is totally unavoidable. This is, and all of that's legitimate. I mean, what we feel is what we feel, and we don't have to ignore that. It matters, but when we take that to our litmus test too, we can also take a step back, and it doesn't mean not feel, but it means take a look at what that's leading to, what it means. If it leads us to a feeling of comfort, a feeling of hope, a feeling of more love for others, a feeling of less judgment, less criticism, a feeling of, more ideas about what to do that's constructive, then we know that idea is coming from God, right? Because the effect of a thought from God is always going to have godlike qualities or characteristics attached to it, right? A thought from God will always make us feel more loved, more worthy, and all those other things I was just listing out. What it will not make us feel is like, oh my gosh, the road is narrowing, we're almost out of time, there's no solutions left. That's not going to be a thought from God. A thought from God is not going to make you think, oh, those people out there, they're hopeless, there's nothing we can do about them, I hate that person. They're not going to make us feel like, just sad and alone and just, small in the world. Those feelings are never going to be associated with what God gives. It doesn't mean we have to ignore them, but it means when we do recognize this thought is making me feel those thoughts, those feelings, what do I do about it? We always can then go deeper than that, right? That is not ignoring it, but it is saying, what is even more fundamental to who I am? What is it about the nature of God which tells me there's a whole nother way to look at, these thoughts that are coming to me, that helps me deal with those thoughts, which helps me, find more freedom in my life and find the kind of ideas that do bring more godlike qualities and characteristics. So our internal litmus test, if we're wondering, am I hearing God? Am I feeling God? Is, well, if I'm being totally honest with myself and with God, how does this make me feel? Because even if something feels challenging, even if something is kind of like once in a while, we all sort of need a little kind of like smack up the head, wake up, like, we all get off track once in a while. And so even if it's a thought like that, if it's coming from love, it's going to make us go, oh gosh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Right. I was off, but it's not going to make us feel small and stupid. It's not going to make us feel like we're not spiritual enough. So any thought that comes from God, if we're being really honest with how these thoughts make us feel, we'll know. Our internal litmus test will tell us, is this leading to God-like qualities and characteristics? Does it make me feel God-like, this kind of stuff that would grow out of the nature of God, or not? And if it doesn't, again, there's something we can do about that. Hopefully that's helpful. Somebody's asking, do you feel we should or should not travel or comply? Do you feel we should or should not travel to comply? Or now that things have reopened, as it demonstrating good to go ahead, as with like a trip or stay at home? I think that relates a little bit to one of the questions that was asked before. And, I would say that I actually read a quote by, Dr. Fossey, probably, who's been kind of leading the charge in this country as the leading expert, in coronavirus and the pandemic, and advisor to administration and other health entities. He said something, and forgive me for this is not a perfect quote, but somebody asked him the question, would you travel at this time? And his response was something to the effect of like, if I was called to do something that was good, to go help somebody, to go do something that I needed to do, yes, I wouldn't be afraid. I would go. But if it was just to, go on vacation or something, then I probably wouldn't go right now. And there's something in that. If you bring it a little bit back to kind of like our litmus test, if the thought comes to do anything, it doesn't matter if it's go to your grocery store, it doesn't matter if it's stay home, it doesn't matter if it's go on a big trip. It's like, what is the thought behind that? Is it leading to something bigger, more embracing of our communities, more helpful? Is it, like the story of the Good Samaritan in the Bible, who, multiple people passed this guy who was injured and beaten on the road, and in part because they were worried that the same bandits that jumped that guy were going to jump them if they took the time to get off, in their donkey or horse or whatever they were riding and go help the guy. And then the guy who stops and helps him is in a way on the surface putting himself in danger, but actually what he's doing is he's adhering to a principle of the universe, which is, when something is truly the right idea, like truly the right thing to do, there is an inherent power behind that. And all the other qualities and characteristics like safety, and protection and health and goodness come with that, right? When there's a principle behind what we're doing, it includes everything like the principle of the universe, which is natural harmony. And it allows us to do the things we need to do. And you see that with, soldiers on the front lines. You see it with essential workers who are out there. You see it with, healthcare providers and first responders, and just people who, put themselves out there to do good for others. And again, we can put all those people in those categories, but then there's like everybody else. And we've all got stuff we need to do every day. We've all got stuff that is right to do every day. And everything that is good and that is right, that has a true and right idea behind it, comes with that, whether it seems like the smallest thing or the biggest thing. This is not just special circumstances or special people. The principle of the universe is behind literally every right activity. And so that's the question we have to ask ourselves. We can't judge things by the surface. We can't judge other people. We have to look deeper than that, right? And so we can ask ourselves, what is the right idea behind this? You might find you have a different opinion than somebody else. You might find that the same person in your family or on your team says, well, I've thought deeply about it too, and I came up with a totally different perspective than you did. But that means you can continue to pray that through. Everybody needs to have the humility to keep stepping back, keep diving in deeper to the nature of God, and finding a way that to work together in a unified way that is rooted in the idea that the principle of the universe doesn't pick and choose. There isn't my way and your way. There can be diversity of approaches, but not in ways that is stepping on each other or endangering other people. So we must hold that up as the bar and say, we won't settle for less than that. We won't settle for less than unity, less than love, less than activity that feels rooted in a principle bigger than ourselves. But to the degree that we're doing that, we can know that the safety, the goodness, the protection, the blessing for others will be inherent in the actions and the decisions that are rooted in that kind of thinking. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to wrap up. We've been on now for a little while together, and I want to say, I guess, one more thing. Make one more point, and then I'm going to read you one passage from each of these two books again. Sometimes people ask me, how do you know? How do you know your prayers are going to do any good? Any of you ever wonder that? Do you ever wonder, okay, maybe I see that if I get an inspired idea that can benefit my life. Maybe we even see it can benefit the life of somebody else that I know or that comes to me and asks me for help. But do you ever wonder, what good do my prayers do for my community, for my country, for the world? That's a normal question. And so here's an idea that's been helpful to me. And it starts with a little math analogy. 3 and 3 equals 6. And we know that just as much as we know that 3 trillion and 3 trillion equals 6 trillion. How do we know? We know because, even though we can't see really 6 trillion of anything, I don't know about you, but I don't think probably any of us could say, oh, I know what 6 trillion of something looks like, right? That's not something that you see per se, but it is still with scientific certainty that 3 trillion and 3 trillion equals 6 trillion. You know that, even though it's not something you see. And again, you know it because there's this principle behind it that we can prove on a daily basis. 3 plus 3 equals 6. So we know the scale is irrelevant because the principle is the same principle. So it's not a blind thing, right? Well, I would say the same thing comes when we go to pray about these bigger issues. When we start to develop and just practice the idea of, looking out at what we face in our communities and saying, what are the mental elements involved here? Do I see fear out there? Do I see greed? Do I see ego? Do I see hate? Do I see inequality? Do I see, what seems like impending doom? Do I see loneliness? Whatever those elements are, we all need to work through them, right? Have you ever dealt with ego before? Have you ever dealt with fear? Have you ever dealt with loneliness? Of course, we all do, right? Well, as we're discovering something about the nature of God, when we're finding the piece of the rock that we build on and the strength that comes from that in overcoming those elements, right? Those mental elements of fear, ego, and so on, loneliness. As we're doing that in our own lives, you may have heard the phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. Well, as we're doing that, we're discovering a principle. And then when we turn around to go pray about something we just saw on our news feed or heard about, we can know with a scientific certainty that our prayers that are rooted in the same principle have a tangible effect. In the same way that we see 3 and 3 is rooted in the same principle as 3 trillion and 3 trillion, and we know we can just add that up without ever having seen it, we may never see, and in most cases we won't see, what our prayers do for our communities or for the world. We're not going to be able to connect the dots and say, oh, I prayed and then that thing changed in that country over there. And yet, if we're proving the principle in our own lives, we can know that the power of that principle is all encompassing, and it does have an effect. Like those guys from Sudan said to me, we need this. This is the only thing that's going to help us and help our families at home. The power is not in us. It's not some magic juju that goes out and affects people. Our prayers are not about manipulating others. They're not about getting other people to think what we want them to think or do what we want them to do. It's about discovering who they already are, what is already built into their nature, what is already directing the course of things in this world. For every element, whatever it seems to be, that whatever mental element seems to be leading things off track, we can discover a power that is deeper and more fundamental that leads things on the right track. And discovering that does make a difference. We can know that there is a scientific principle behind it when we're proving it in our own lives. That is to say, the world needs you. You know, the world needs you to be you. That's coming back to the idea that we're made for the glory of God. What you discover, if it seems small, if it has the power of omnipotent truth behind it, it's not small. It's huge, and the world needs it. The light, Jesus said, you're the light of the world. A light of a city on a hill cannot be hid. You know, when we find ourselves as defined by that light. And we start to see others as defined by that light. We start to see our world and the way things work and go forward in that light. And I guess I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for being you. And I want to thank you for taking the time to think this through, pray about these things, and discover that light in your life, the peace and the strength that comes from that, because the world needs that. I'm going to read you these 2 lines now and just sign off. This is again from the Bible, from St. Paul. And he says, see, now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. Salvation is a way of saying, discovering this grace of God that we talked about, that nothing can separate us from that. Now is the time. Now, we're not waiting for that exterior thing to come or time to pass. It's now, and moment by moment, again and again. And that leads us, you know, to what we've been talking about, that discovery of God's grace. And then lastly, from, again, Science and Health, the Key to the Scriptures, by Mary Baker Eddy. She says, it's possible, yea, it's the duty and privilege of every child, man, and woman to follow in some degree the example of the Master by the demonstration of truth and life, of health and holiness. So again, it's built into who we are. It's freely given. And however you go to access that, however you try and dive in and learn and pray, you'll find it, because it's there. The Bible says, seek and you will find. And our ability to understand it, our ability to prove it, is freely given too. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your night. Take care.